Let's build a double-speed shulker loader that is one wide tileable and will load shulker boxes at a rate of 18,000 items per hour. This was actually a whole lot of fun to design. I used a bunch of mechanics that I've always neglected. So before the tutorial, I want to give a breakdown of some of the mechanics, as well as go through the different designs that I tried to make work before I ended up with this final result. This will also sort the boxes to ensure that if you tile a bunch of these next to each other, they don't steal boxes from neighboring slices. But the way I handled doing that on this double speed design is completely different than the way I handled it on the single speed design if you've happened to have seen that video. The most interesting thing that I messed with during this process is abusing scaffolding updates to send signals up and over in a tileable manner. If we change the support blocks that the scaffolding is sitting on by opening or closing a trapdoor or moving a block, an observer can notice that change, because when the support of scaffolding changes, it updates all of the scaffolding to see if it should break or not. While this is one wide tileable, the scaffolding is staggered, because I noticed if we don't stagger them, and two neighboring sections trigger at the exact same time, one of them will sometimes skip their activation. When I first sat down to start derping around on this, the first issue that came to mind was how do we trigger the box breaking and dispensing, since the double speed hoppers are just kind of in the way. My first thought was to loop the signal down, over, and up through the output area. But the problem I was running into is getting the dispenser to trigger after the piston broke the box. Plus it made the output kind of weird and bulky since we had to send a signal through using barrel. And so I was just like, screw it. Okay, we're going to use two barrels to maintain the double hopper speed and just shove the signal through. You know, this totally works. But it's kind of expensive. You know, it added this chest and these two barrels and all these extra hoppers in between the double speed filter and the rest of it. I mean, this is like 14 hoppers and 4 containers. And so I was like, okay, well, let's just go above the filter. We can loop it around the back of the filter using torches and then pistons and other things to send the signal over. And this works, but it's still kind of expensive. It's not ideal. It has all these flickering torches and these pistons that are moving things, and even the hoppers themselves, it doesn't seem very ideal. And so I kept going. And that's when I started messing with scaffolding. But I knew that, like, okay, we can update scaffolding to send signals. So maybe we can utilize that here to bypass all of the torches and pistons and stuff. But then I needed a shortener into something that can update the scaffolding. So I used 2 pistons and an observer to create a shortener that updates the scaffolding just once whenever it's triggered. And that's still not ideal. But then in the process, I realized that, okay, maybe we can change the double speed filter. You know, hoppers pointed down into each other are double speed, so can we just use that on a double speed filter? I'm just so used to having filters pointed forward to allow for chest storage that I didn't even think about it for a while. But then it was like, okay, we can just have all the hoppers pointed straight down, and that works for the filter and for everything else. And then for the shortener and block updater for the scaffolding, a trapdoor plus an AND gate can do both of those things all at once. The trapdoor only opens when both torches are turned off, and it updates the scaffolding whenever it toggles. And we can use that same concept to help send the signal down here on the front, removing yet another piston. And that part was all thanks to the Discord member Maestro. I wouldn't have even thought to use a trapdoor on the front if it wasn't for his comment. It's also important to think about the speed of the system that you're trying to attach this to. Like this single speed loader that I've tutorialed out in the past is perfect for most storage systems, because most storage systems and filters are functioning at single hopper speed, whereas this new one is functioning at double hopper speed. But to actually gain anything from the extra speed and the extra complexity, we have to be loading items into it at double hopper speed as well, which means that we need a water stream that's functioning at double hopper speed in order to accomplish that. So we would need something like the output of a farm, or this 50 furnace super smelter that I recently uploaded. This has 50 furnaces, so it's smelting at double hopper speed. So we would need to convert the output of this smelter to a water stream to take advantage of the loader. We couldn't just use a line of hoppers because a line of hoppers is only functioning at single hopper speed. And if you need more information on hopper speed, you can check out this video that I'll link up here in the corner. But basically this all boils down to the system that you're trying to plug this into. If you're just trying to plug it onto a hopper line, then go build this single speed filter. This is functioning at single hopper speed and has an accessible box where you can quickly grab some items out of the shulker that's being loaded if you need to. Whereas the only benefit of this new design is that it's functioning at double hopper speed, but you can't access the box and it's more expensive. So first be conscious of how fast of a loader you actually need before you decide on which one to build. The height of the machine will be influenced by how many output chests you have. If we have 2 stacked chests to store our full boxes, the total height will be 12 blocks tall, but that will either go up or down just depending on how many chests you have on each cell. Now, like I mentioned before, it is one wide tileable, but it's also staggered, where some sections, mainly the scaffolding, are different from cell to cell. There are actually 2 different slices. So we're going to build one slice first, and then build an example of the second one. The total width of the machine is 11 blocks deep. And then of course, this is infinitely tileable. We're going to start off by placing as many storage chests as we want here in the front. Keep in mind that these are for full shulker boxes for the item being loaded. But then we're going to place hoppers pointed into these chests. Then we're going to go up by 2 temporary blocks on top of these hoppers and place 2 more hoppers that are pointed into the top temporary block. Then break out our temporary blocks, place a 3rd hopper pointed into the top one, and then we want 4 hoppers pointed down into that one. So this top hopper is our main intake, meaning that this is where our water stream needs to go. Now, depending on what style of water stream you like to build, the water will either be on top of the hopper or on top of the block that will be next to the hopper, one of these 2 positions. So that will be up to you. But then come down here, place a block diagonally back from that hopper with a comparator looking at it. Then 2 blocks diagonally down from that with dust on top, going into a target block that has a torch on the back and top. And you don't have to use any of the target blocks if you're only going to build one of these slices. The targets just make it tileable. But then we're going to place a repeater pointed forward in that hole, a torch on the front side of that block, then solid blocks above the torch and above the repeater, a target floating up here diagonally up from those, with a torch on the front side, and then another block diagonally back. Then diagonally back from the target, we're going to place a floating glass with 3 dust looping around. Then 2 solid blocks on top of the torch and target, with a comparator on top of that one, looking at any solid block. Now I'm going to use pack ice just to show that this is where our water stream goes. But that doesn't have to be pack ice. It can be any solid block. It really all just depends on what style of water stream you prefer. Regardless, these top 2 hoppers are our filter hoppers, and we're going to start off by loading the second hopper from the top. We're going to place a full stack of the item being sorted for in the first slot, and then we're going to place 4 filler items in the last 4 slots. I would recommend just using non-stackable items as the filler. But if you want, you can just take 4 of any random item and name it on an anvil and use that as filler. But we need to load that second hopper first. Then we want to load the top hopper. So in this top hopper, we're going to use 4 singular filler items in the last 4 slots that can stack to 64, and that will never be in the system. So like name 4 seeds or 4 sticks on an anvil. And those filler items need to be different than the filler items used in the second hopper. But then we just need to place at least 1 of the item being sorted for in the first slot. And there will always be 41 of that item trapped in this hopper. That's what makes this overflow protected. But if you're not tiling these next to each other and you're only building one, it doesn't actually have to be overflow protected. But then we want to place any kind of wall next to the top hopper with a trapdoor of any kind flush on top of that wall with a solid block floating above it. Then we want an observer looking up at that wall, going into a solid block, then a sticky piston under that pointed down, with a redstone torch on the side of that piston, with an observer looking up at that torch. Then we want a dispenser under that observer pointed toward the hole in between those hoppers. Make sure that is a dispenser and not a dropper. Now we just need to loop a signal from the back over to the front. So we're going to place a solid block above this torch with a torch on the back side and a block above that. And then everything past this is for this specific slice. But then we want a trapdoor flush with those blocks, then scaffolding in that hole going over on top of the trapdoor, then up until it's aligned with that floating block there in the front. Then we're going to go over toward that block with more scaffolding till we're one away. Place an observer in that hole looking at the scaffolding so it powers that block. And that's it. We are now totally done with a single slice. So you can just skip ahead if you're just going to build one of these. But if you want to tile them next to each other, we're going to build everything exactly the same except for the scaffolding, the trapdoor, and that observer up there. So that trapdoor, that scaffolding, and that observer are all going to be different. But everything else is going to be exactly the same. So we just build exactly what we built before. We're right next to the first one. And don't forget to load the filter hoppers, starting with the second one from the top, placing in a full stack of the item being sorted for in the first slot, then 4 filler items in the last 4 slots, then in the top hopper, at least 1 of the item being sorted for in the first slot, then 4 singular stackable to 64 items that will never be in the system in the last 4 slots. And once that's done and everything's built, we're going to build the variation. So come around here to the back, and we're going to place a torch on the top of that block, with a block above that, a torch on the side, and another solid block above that. Then any kind of trapdoor flush with that block, so that you are left with this. So the second slice will have these extra torches and blocks. But then we're going to place scaffolding, going over on top of that trapdoor, then 1 above the previous scaffolding, and then build it all the way over aligned with the other. Place an observer looking at that scaffolding with a dust behind that observer. And that's it. That's all there is to the variation. So we're just staggering the scaffolding so that none of it is connected to each other. That way it doesn't interrupt each other if there's a simultaneous update to the scaffolding. And here in a minute, I will build an example of tiling multiples of these next to each other, just in case the staggeredness is confusing. But really quick, go ahead and place any non-full block on top of these bottom output hoppers. So like mud, soul sand, powdered snow, or cobwebs. That will help organize the shulkers as they break, so that neighboring sections don't steal each other's boxes. As an example of tiling a bunch of these next to each other, we just replicate the pattern. So everything up until that trapdoor right there will be exactly the same. So we just duplicate these slices up until this trapdoor part. Then we come up here and place a trapdoor on every other block going across, then a torch everywhere that there is not a trapdoor there on the back. Then we place scaffolding in that hole, then on top of these trapdoors, going up and over, aligned with the floating blocks there in the front. So the observer that will be looking at the scaffolding will be aligned with those floating blocks, like so. Then the torch sections will simply have 2 blocks above the torch, with a torch on the side of the lower one, and a trapdoor flush with the top one. Then just like before, the scaffolding will go from that block on top of the trapdoor, then up and around, but this time it'll be 1 block higher than those floating blocks. So the observer will need to have dust behind it in order to power that block. And that's it, we just continue that pattern. Regardless of how many you build, we will need to load empty shulker boxes into these dispensers. So you can either load them directly into the dispensers, or you can have hoppers that are feeding them with like a rail system maybe, so that you can load all of the dispensers from the same source. Or you can use chests. You can tie in neighboring cells by having the chest be front facing, or you can have sideways chest to increase the total storage for each individual one. It's all up to like how many empty boxes you want to have in reserves and how you want to load those boxes in. But of course, if you don't think you need very many boxes, you can just load them directly into the dispensers. That would be totally fine. But we also need to place buttons on the bottoms of these dispensers after we've loaded a box in. because we need to manually load the very first shulker into the system. After this, you will never have to press that button ever again. Anytime a box is full, it will automatically break and get replaced by an empty one. However, if you run out of empty reserve boxes, you will need to restock them and then press the button again to re-dispense the first shulker. But as long as it's never empty, it will just keep going automatically forever. Now, technically, if you tile a bunch of these next to each other, they actually trigger neighboring dispensers to try and dispense a box. So even if it runs out, if you built multiples of these next to each other and some of them are still loading boxes, they will go ahead and trigger the empty ones once you restock them. That can actually be really handy if you tile a bunch of these next to each other, because in doing so, it makes it really hard to see if all of them have a box or not until you go to restock. But if you're restocking boxes using a rail system, then you might not ever even know that one of them ran out of boxes and broke. But even if that happens, the neighboring cells will eventually refresh the broken one and fix it all on their own. Whenever their box gets full and they break it and dispense a new one, it will go ahead and try to dispense boxes into any empty neighboring cell. So it's just a nice little feature to help avoid potential problems. But let me know what you plan on using this for. Are you attaching it to a farm or a smelter, or do you have some crazy double speed storage system? I would love to know what you got going on. But that's all we got for this episode. If you enjoyed, don't forget to like, favorite, share, and subscribe. Always remember that you are totally awesome, but above all, don't forget to have fun. Bye-bye.